Hi.
Sweet.
I'll introduce myself and then you can introduce yourself and maybe we can get started.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm Brian Cam. I'm an independent researcher, writer. I do podcasts. For some reason, I'm doing these streams, which enjoy doing. We were just talking about a kind of form of drafting lectures. So rather than, giving a thing that I've written and polished and, sort of got an exact idea of what I'm going to say for an hour, I just start talking. If there's anything good out of that, maybe out of an hour, I'll take like 5 minutes or something and I could use that later. Um, but you and I met a few weeks ago and had a very good single conversation then and just a bit of a conversation today. So yeah, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Aman. I am an AI scientist at Amazon Alexa, and in general, I just moved to London, and I met Brian just a week ago. And in general, we had a very good conversation about truth, and we shat on rationalism quite a lot, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, at this moment, like we discussed before, that I'm rereading Anti-Fragile, and so when I read Anti-Fragile, I was doing my thesis, my research thesis, and now I'm like revisiting and then coming up with like trying to reconcile it with the idea of going like bottoms up then top down. Like try like not lots of theory building, not lots of logic, but more experiments, more empiricism. So that kind of like that's where I am right now, like
Mm-hmm.
ideas and thoughts.
And how are you finding Anti-Fragile this time? Did you like?
Yeah, it's like there's so much that I think I missed last time, but I did get the gist of it. But you know what? Like coming from so I did my bachelor's in like computer science. So and coming from that kind of background, you would think like you would not know how poetry works. Like with maths and with these kind of logic things, you write down everything in detail, and all of it is right there. So
Yeah.
in my mind, any kind of book should be just read once, and
Mm,
the idea would follow like a proof pattern. So you start with the hypothesis, you do some logic, and in the end, you come up with an answer. That's it. Rereading should not do too much to it. But then you have poetry and then your art, where the it's intentional to hide the. It's not intentional, but then the idea itself is so deep that you
mm,
cannot express it in one go. Like it's like a diamond, like it has different faces, and I found this thing like in so many other things like music, poetry, like stories. It's more about the vibes. It shows
mm,
you
mm.
different faces at different times, and you'll never get the whole of it. You just have to get, and that's also like coming from a maths angle. You have
Yeah.
to get used to the ambiguity that yeah, you will never understand the full scope of it, but you can like explore different part of it. So this whole idea of rereading and like like I can keep going, but that's yeah.
No,
That's
it's fascinating, and I've thought about Taleb sort of recently because I've been reading Nietzsche, and Nietzsche has this, they're kind of this aphoristic form. So they're it's even though they're organized in some of the works into longer essays, they're also often split up into these small uh, sections or aphorisms, and sometimes you'll get hundreds in a single book, and they kind of all circle around the same topic, even though they're not like it's not linear. It's almost kind of like a circular, not a circular argument, but like it builds upon itself because it you have to establish. It's almost like showing a way of thinking rather than showing a
yes,
linear progression or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Do you
And
find that
yes,
with
go
his
on.
Inserto series, or
Sorry.
do you find that with Anti-Fragile and those kind of books, or?
Yeah, exactly. Like with now, that's what I was going to say with Balaji's new book. I think that's the nation, how to build your own country, something around that. So he also has this whole idea that okay, he summarizes the whole book in like one sentence, and then he has a one paragraph summary, then a one page summary, and then he has the whole book. So this idea that there is an idea or there is something that you want to express, but then you need like different angles to it. So
Mm,
at some point you can just summarize it with just one sentence. Then from looking from another angle, it could be a page. Then it could be a book, and you can keep like approaching it from like different angles. So this idea is really good though. Like I was not used to.
yeah, it's a kind of fractal. Yeah, I really like that, and that's relating to the kind of note taking that I'm doing with the Zettelkasten, which is basically, often I'm taking a quote from someone and then making links across to other things, but also I do a summary of what actually happens in the quote, and then I'm summarizing almost that summary in the title, so then I can find it, and then occasionally I'll come across it and I'll be like, no, now I've think about this differently now, and I'm going to create a new note that's like the new interpretation. So it is this kind of
Fractals.
yeah, exactly, and
I like the recursion kind of thing, right? You can keep building and can keep going down, keep going up, and there's like no like upper bound or how much abstract you want to go, or not
mm,
like lower bound. Like you can keep going both ways. So it's
yeah,
fun.
and Nietzsche calls it rumination, which is funny because it's like got this imitation or this idea of like chewing the cud, like the cow, like kind of
Ah,
mulling it over and chewing and chewing and kind of regurgitating it and then chewing it some more. And I don't know. I've always found it that if, like a funny image for this kind of thinking.
but I think it is very accurate. Like it also depends on at so at what point of your life you get exposed to an idea.
Yeah,
It's a very different. You will receive it differently. So like what you said about the chewing the cud. Like you sometimes have to spit it out, and
yeah.
then take it back again, and this time it will be something else that you like. Let's say you get a meta view on it, like that you didn't realize before. That
Mhm.
why you like that idea in the first place, or something.
Yeah, I've just looked up. So in this system, I just searched for rumination, and I've got aphoristic form and rumination, two different. Have you read any Nietzsche or?
I've not done an intense study, but I have read like here and there like some of his pages, and I like the way he writes though. Like,
Mm.
I think do you think Taleb got inspired from his writings?
Yeah, I wonder if he did or not. Like, certainly because
Style, like the bravado,
yeah,
like it's very like very neat to
it's
like
provocative, like, and it's short. So this is from the beginning of on the genealogy of morality, which is written in 1887, and it's Nietzsche's kind of view of like how does morality begin? It's actually in dialogue with these kind of questions that come up in Plato, which is like, and it relates to Freud actually. So we could talk about that because you were just saying you're reading The Courage to be Disliked, which is kind of anti-Freudian, which I think I love that book, by the way. I have time for Freud. I like a lot of what he's up to,
Mhm.
but the yeah, how is it related? I suppose genealogy of morality is written from the point of view that morality means like putting limits on what you do, right? It's like consenting to have your natural desires or some kind of desires, like putting a limit on them and behaving in a way that you find unnatural. So he's like, how do we get into this situation that no one really wants the situation that we're in? So like, which is like Freud's, civilization and its discontents is also very much like this. It's like, why, like, it's not so much a question of like, oh, morality is bad, and more a question of like, how could this have happened? You know what I mean?
Like why do we have to put a limit on our own like thing, right?
Yeah, and it seems kind of at odds with what you might think of as like social Darwinism or something like that, which is like if the strong were really strong and kind of were able to express domination or something, then it would seem like wouldn't they just do whatever they wanted rather than like how did we end up in this situation where actually that's not really what happens. So I'm probably doing a really bad job of summarizing it, but it's from the beginning of that work, Genealogy of Morality, and it's section 8. I'm wondering, I could probably even share my screen, although my screen is not all that attractive right now, as in it's just a terminal. But
This, yeah, that the screen should be attractive. No,
yeah,
I do it with the terminal though. Like my
do
terminal,
you use a terminal?
yeah, it was super sexy with the powers ZSH and all that
Yeah.
fancy emoji stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, I've got the ZSH. I'm going to read the Scarpitti translation of the Nietzsche just for the hell of it.
yeah,
So he says, in less capable hands, the aphoristic form. So like aphorisms, which is what we're talking about, I guess, these short chunks of text. In less capable hands, the aphoristic form may prove difficult, but this is only because this form is treated too casually today. An aphorism, if properly coined and cast into its final form, is far from being deciphered, in quotes, as soon as it has been read. On the contrary, it is only after this prelude that interpretation, properly speaking, begins. And of course, for that purpose, an art of interpretation is necessary. The third essay in this book furnishes an example of what in such cases I call interpretation. An aphorism is prefixed to that essay, whereas that which follows it is commentary. There's certainly something which is essential in order to practice reading as an art, something which has nowadays been forgotten. That is why it will take quite some time for my readings to become readable. And for this, it is necessary to become almost a cow, and under no circumstances a modern man. I mean, he has like in bold letters, rumination. So it's
I
like,
like this guy. I like this guy. I like this guy. I'm already liking this guy.
so it's funny, right? Because he's already saying, no one in my lifetime will understand me, which was like very much true for Nietzsche. Basically, like he got increasingly irrelevant as he got older. He was this kind of child prodigy
Yeah.
in philology, and then and in classics and stuff, and then he got this really extremely young position as a professor. And then as he went on, his writing got weirder and weirder, and it
Crazy,
kind of
right?
it took a long time to absorb him in some sense. So I don't know if that triggers anything for you, but
That-
it seems related somehow.
now I can see where like I get a meta view on it. So remember how I started saying that if you come from a maths perspective, that
Mm,
you won't understand poetry, but I
mm,
wrong. I just realized because of this the way he says okay the aphorism, how do you say it?
yeah, aphorism. Yeah.
Aphorism, yeah. So you put the aphorism and the rest is commentary. Now if you think about it, in linear algebra, right, you
Mm,
have like matrices and vectors and all that stuff. A physicist looks at vectors in terms of magnitude, direction, force, and all that, right? But as
mm,
a computer scientist looks at it as a list of numbers.
mm,
But the maths guy, when he writes his equations, so he just those things are like he just the equations are there, but then if you look at it from this angle, it's something else entirely, and if you look at it from this angle, it's something else entirely. But then still it works. So the rest of the math guy can say, okay, this is the equation is the poetry,
yes.
and the rest of it, like all of physics and computer science, is commentary. And
Mm,
like just
mm,
using it to explain different, like the physicist will use it to explain actual physical phenomena, right? And the computer scientist guy will maybe let's say use it to crunch numbers. But then
yeah.
that equation is the poetic line in a way, right?
That's fascinating. So are you saying that because it's a kind of condensation, or it's the most pure form
Yeah,
of
it's like
the,
very dense. You'll never get it in one go. Like one equation is like the linear algebra equations, right? You can look at it from like so many different angles. Like in
mm,
AI, we have like already like two different ways. Now, oh, now my mind is like, okay, now I can feel it going somewhere. Okay, see,
mm, mm,
in AI, what happens is you have a so the way you train the networks, right? That you use gradient descent. This whole idea of descent is to look at it from a visual angle. So you
mm,
imagine it as like a multidimensional, landscape, and then you have to go down the loss, right? And then there are some people who do not like that way of looking at it. They like
mm,
other ways, like probabilistic ways of looking at it. But it's still the same thing. you're just looking at it from different angles. And since the science is not settled on AI,
Right.
so you do not know exactly where is the aphorism, like the main equation. So you're
Right.
just trying and hitting it from different sides and trying to find, okay, where is the condensed idea.
And is that so? Is that sort of because like machine learning is kind of it's like is it a I'm trying to follow. Is it because it's kind of like approaching it from the opposite direction? It's like an exploration of or an
Not
attempt to establish it. I don't
Yeah,
know. Go
not
on.
really. Yeah, no worry, but not really. Like from opposite direction. It's just like different perspective on it. Like what
Mm,
you feel like is because you see with because it's not settled. By settled, what I mean is that there is no grand theory
mm,
why
mm.
it works, right?
Okay.
We just know there are some tricks, like there are some methods, some
Yes.
techniques that can make it work. But why do those methods work so well? So
Mm, mm,
explain
mm,
that. You can explain it from a visual angle. You can explain it from like very different, like people adopt different. I like the visual angle, for example, but
mm,
other people might like they are like professors. They have their whole labs were dedicated to not looking at it from a visual angle,
mm,
looking at it
mm,
from
mm.
like a completely different angle. So yeah, that
Yeah.
does that answer your question or
Yeah. That it's fascinating. I mean, yeah, the connection between poetry. So I studied literature actually, and so but I did quite a lot of like sort of 18th century English poetry in my master's, and but it's only like as an adult that it's only like more recently that I've really gotten into trying to study poetry in the way that it needs to be studied. And again, a bit like the aphorism, you don't get it the first time, right? Like it's almost like music is the same way, right? Which is like you kind of start to love it from like the fifth listen to the album, or sometimes you think you love it, and by the fifth listen, 10th listen, you're like, actually, it wasn't as original as I thought, or whatever. And so maybe there's something in that, which is that an equation also being so kind of I don't know about purified or something like that. That its use, it's almost like its use is to find new applications or something like that, and its abstraction, it takes you away, like you were saying, if you're doing experimental sciences, then you're kind of looking for ways to use these
yeah.
equations or something, but it does require this like process of return, just like the aphorisms
Yeah.
and the
Like
poem, right?
keep coming back, and think about it. The music is the same thing. So every piece of music is condensed vibes,
Mm.
right? So it's like distilled. So the musician, I don't know how people create, because I'm not a musician, right? But I would imagine
Mm,
like great musicians, what they would do is they would get a feeling and they would try to like condense it. And since they are great for some reason, that condensation applies to too many people, like so many people, and they pick their music, they make their own interpretation. So let's say somebody is having a lazy afternoon and
mm,
that one particular, or they're driving, and that one particular piece of song that reminds them or just matches that vibe.
right.
So that song is a condensed vibe, and then you can like apply it in a party, maybe while you're driving. Some people apply it differently, but it's all commentary.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I mean, it makes me wonder too whether it's like if it relates to trial and error, which is another topic that I'm really fascinated by. I feel like I remember one of these music producers, I think it's Brian Eno, talking about, like within the studio, it's like like even if you think it, like any idea, you have to try out. So like if someone has an idea and you're like internally you're like, that's terrible, it's not going to work, you're not allowed to judge it until you've actually like tried it. And so then there's this kind of implicit understanding that you kind of can't know in advance what's going to work and what's not going to work. So it's like um but you are searching, like maybe you can tell what's closer and what's further away, but um you can't know in advance necessarily what technique will best achieve that, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I think the only place, and we are very lucky, like what we were discussing last time. Remember that it only works in physics, and we are
Mm,
lucky that it works in physics. In biology, it doesn't work.
mm,
You cannot like you have to try it on a like a doctor cannot. make theories, he has to try it on the patient,
Mm, mm.
right? And like, and the whole doctors basically do trial and error, like in a
Yes.
nice codified way, and so that they're licensed and they do not actually harm the patient, but they do trial and error though. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like Taleb talks about that, right? It's like empiricism versus dogmatism, because there's this. I've got a note that says 300 BC to now, which is this kind of, and so it was this idea that let's see, the school's name was so there's an empiric school,
Hmm.
Imperia, because they profess to derive their knowledge from experiences only, and in doing so set themselves in opposition to the dogmatic school. They had overlap with the philosophical school of Pyrrhonism,
Hmm.
and the empirics approached medicine exactly as the Pyrrhonists approached the whole of life. So Pyrrho of Elis is this skeptic philosopher, and I guess he kind of doubts that uh, these grand theories, especially when they're completely separated from experimental evidence, are going to work. And so instead, they're very focused on, you know, what actually works in practice, right? And there are limits to that too, because even by using words, we're adhering to kind of abstract categories that tend towards that like the more abstract the word gets, the more sort of dogmatic it becomes, right?
Yeah,
But
more
in a
general.
conversation, you have this chance to recalibrate and return to the empirical side, by like you and I could say, well, what do you actually mean by this word, and sharpen up that definition, at least for the purposes of this conversation, right? And in that sense, for me, that would be like a step away from dogmatism, you know?
That is so true. Now that you say it, so so this has been happening to me for a year now. All right. So I so how do I start? So when I talk, when I try to explain something to somebody,
Mm,
I like to like explain it in very detail.
mm,
Like that's
mm,
how I used to do it. Trying, like what I told you this already. Like I'm trying to get into more question answering mode. Anyway,
mm.
so when I'm trying to explain something, I like to give it a proof, like a whole code.
Mm,
Like
mm.
everything detailed, like everything is there at one go,
Yes.
right? But it's not a good way to explain things to people, right? It's not. The best way I found is like somebody like a poet, like a musician, like a good teacher. He will give you a seed which will inspire questions in you. Then you can ask him questions, and then it goes back and forth. So if you're teaching, let's say you have your lectures, uh,
Mm, mm.
the, I used to think the best way to lecture is to give you the entire thing and make everything very simple, each step by step, and all the steps should be very clear, like how I understand it. So I can, like the Feynman thing, that if you can explain it to
Yeah.
somebody like, without any jargon. So that was my way. That I used to think that's the best way to give a lecture, right?
Mm,
Without any like, just give everything, like no bullshit, like the entire thing.
mm,
But
mm,
now
mm.
I'm thinking that that's not the good way, like the conversation way, like the Socrates dialogue.
Yes.
I think that is the good way. And it's like poetry almost, because you don't explain your full idea, you just give a
Yes.
hint so that it inspires question from the other person. And then you have this like dialogue, which is
Can I ask if have you read many of those dialogues, the Socrates ones?
really not really.
Because I had a conversation last Sunday with my friend Eyal Shai, who's also in the Interintellect, and that's a podcast that's going to be out. He has this podcast called Deep Dive, which I can recommend. It's a really good set of conversations that he does. But he and we've had some conversations about Plato. He's a big fan, and I'm like, I wouldn't say I'm not, but I have some reservations about Plato. And there's all kinds of debate about what does Plato think. What does Socrates think? What do the interlocutors think? Is it all kind of like a drama that's supposed to like point in some direction that's not quite what any of the characters say? You know what I mean? Because um, but I have like such a visceral reaction to Socrates, because, and it's actually relates to exactly what we're talking about, which is that he really isn't interested in experience. So anytime someone says, like, "Oh, I can give you an example," he'll say, "What is piety?" or something like that, and then someone will be like, "Oh, it's like when you do this or that," and he'll be like, "No, no, no, I don't want any examples. I want the abstract principle behind those examples." And this is the thing that drives me nuts because
Uh, he's an annoying guy though.
yeah,
Like,
he's very annoying. Yeah, he's called like a gadfly or whatever. And I get why, like, on the one hand, I think I agree with him that the conversation is he was opposed supposedly to writing things down because he thought writing is not responsive in the way
mm,
that conversation is, and it can't answer back. So you read it and you see that, and so in a certain sense, his attitude was that the written word is inherently dogmatic, which is like a pretty interesting position, right? Like you can kind of see what he means, right? Which is that
yeah, yeah,
if you're like, what, you can't ask a text what it means. Like if it's well constructed, then you can kind of through kind of re-engagement and maybe rereading come to some understanding of what it means. And I guess sorry, not Adler.
that book.
This, yeah, Courage to be Disliked, right? It's also written as a
Yeah,
series of
yeah,
memoirs,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Which is yeah, but then I think that's so two things.
Yeah.
Two threads. First of all, he is right. I do not agree with asking like annoying questions. Like ask good questions.
Mm,
I think Visa on Twitter, he's a
mm,
very good advocate of this. Like
yes.
ask interesting questions. So
Mm,
ask
mm,
questions, but ask interesting questions, right?
right.
So yeah, let's just leave it there. But the other thing, the written word, yes, it is basically it's not as good as having a one-on-one, but then anything you have written, it scales, so you can
Yes, it's durable, right?
yeah, so you can use it to reach people through space and also through time. So
Mm, mm,
first, to have the written word in a way. But I think then I wonder, like, what are the great writers,
yeah.
do they kind of like want to simulate the conversation? So the conversation
Mm,
is the ideal. So the great writers, are they trying to like go there? Like it's a spectrum, and the better your writing is, the more conversational it gets. Is
mm.
it true? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really hard one, isn't it? Because I could go all over with this. Like, I do think some of the best written texts come out of kind of oral traditions, right? And some people would argue, oh yeah, the reason Homer has this like kind of power, or parts of the Old Testament, or the Tao Te Ching, or things like that, are because they're actually like they're living oral traditions and they get written down right at that moment where they're like alive. And even this situation with Freud or Adler, right? They have these circles where they're working on these ideas together. And so there's a kind of maybe like synthesis and even potentially like simplicity that comes together from that conversational element where it just hits you know what I mean? Like a lot of religious texts are like this, you know what I mean? Like they don't have a sense of an individual author.
Yes.
They
Yes.
have the sense of kind of this, I suppose godlike wisdom. And that may just be that's what happens when you combine minds, at scale, sort of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would just like to like I have like this thought I need to before you go on. So religious texts, I think, are the most durable kind of text, right? And like what you're saying, Nietzsche, he said we have lost the art of reading. Maybe the art of reading is how the religious texts are meant to be read.
Mm, mm,
Let's say the Quran, the Bible, or like the Torah, but then you have like a teacher to discuss.
mm, mm.
You have reading groups. You discuss what these paragraphs mean as a group, and maybe that's the best way. Like the religion books, the religious books, maybe they have figured it out. Like that is the best way to pass knowledge through like scale, and also have that the conversation part of it. Is
Yeah,
that
that's a fascinating idea. Yeah, that it's actually, yeah, because this way of reading, which is like requires a kind of it ends up being like a conversation between you and the text, right? Which is that, it persists over time. You kind of return to it. You see, maybe you go away from what you've read and you have some questions, but so then you come back to the text with a new kind of perspective, right? And you might, in that sense, it's like the text speaks to you and you come back to it with your own questions, and then it says something different when you come in that different understanding.
Yeah. The Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu religious text, it has this explicit saying, what you just said right now, that this text is meant to answer your questions. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, you come with your questions and there will be an answer in the
Wow.
text. You have to read through it and find out. But also the way, like I don't know how they do it in, I guess, in the Jewish culture, I guess they also
Mm,
have like reading groups, so led by one priest, the rabbi, I guess. And in Islam as well, like there is the, I don't know what, the imam or something they call them, and
mm,
they lead these reading groups. So it's not only a one-to-one conversation with the text, you also have like a tradition, like, like these imams get their knowledge from the old guy, so there is
mm,
like a line
mm,
of what Samuel also calls, like live organizations or something,
mm, mm,
live players. It's
yeah,
a line of tradition that is actually like teachers pass to teachers, pass to teachers, and then you connect, talk to the teacher, so the idea is like still alive in their
yeah.
head.
And it's kind of responsive,
Yes,
right? And
yes,
yeah, and so that part of the kind of Socratic dialogues I really like. But then this attitude that, well, like you were saying about asking good questions, like there, there, I often feel like Socrates is not acting in good faith. Basically, like he's actually there to like trip you up, right? Like, I feel like the naive understanding that I had, from school and whatever, about Plato and these dialogues with Socrates and his interlocutors was that, oh yeah, like he takes this kind of rational position against these sophists, and the sophists are there just trying to like look impressive. They're not really interested in reason. They're only interested in rhetoric or something like that. And Socrates is so attached to the truth that he has to like keep drilling towards that. And I think that's like you can kind of sustain that reading, but also like to me it's also just like Socrates is annoying and he's like trying to make people look bad. Like it's almost like, you
yeah,
know, even though it's like he hides behind this questioning attitude, like, oh, I just want to help you, improve your own views by like asking you questions, and I know nothing and all this stuff. And it's like from the outside that sounds good, but when you actually read it, you're like, dude, you're just like trying to make these people look stupid. You know what I mean? Like there's a
yeah.
bad faith element to it. Is what
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
That bad faith element. I think you're. That's, yeah. That's how I look at it as well. Like it becomes more of a. That's why I don't like debates. For example,
right.
I like discussions, because the whole point of debate is to convince someone or the audience. I mean, you cannot change people anyway. So I have give like this is from the reading the book. Okay, like
Which
I
one, the courage to be
the
disliked?
person is like, yeah. So I have this tendency. You know what I used to do? I think you will relate. Tell me if you do. So there were some times after, like, for a year, I used to, like, when I would go to sleep or I'm just bored, I used to rehash the conversation I had with
Oh
an
yeah.
friend, and I was like, okay, why did I not convince him? Like,
Yeah.
what do I say that I would have convinced him? And I used to get like very into it. Like it used to like enrage me in a way, not like make me angry, but get me really like, why wouldn't he see it this way? Like,
Yes.
what do I have to do? The fault is with me that I couldn't explain it correctly, maybe. But but this is such a like the Socrates way, like you're saying. After reading that book, I was like, okay, I'm not trying to change people. My argument is not to make you learn something or any of these things. I'm just having a conversation now. I do not want to debate. Just
Yeah,
this,
you're not trying to like persuade or win the argument or
yeah.
convince someone else that they're wrong. You're just
Just a conversation. At best, like let's say if I'm gonna lecture somebody, let's say I'm gonna teach somebody, and then the ideal would be to inspire them.
Mm, mm, mm.
Inspire them.
Yeah, and that's an idea in the courage to be disliked, right? That the only thing you can actually do that's sort of positive for other people is just like encourage them, right? And it's like everyone kind of has to build their own courage, and yet at the same time, you can't like do anything for someone else really. You can't you can't do the work for them, but you can have a kind of mutually encouraging interaction, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's the yeah that way Socrates is annoying though. He is he's pretty annoying. He's not trying to. He's not. He doesn't want them for real. To like he just wants to engage. And
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, this whole like Socratic position does relate to what I'm interested in, because it kind of, they're reaching these levels of kind of abstraction when you ask, okay, what is virtue, or what is piety, or what is courage? It's like, well, why should those have a kind of core to them? It's not obvious that, and this came up a little bit with Eyal, this question of, well, what beauty is if you say this thing's beautiful, and like this painting is beautiful, and this view of nature is beautiful, and this novel is beautiful, and this poem is beautiful, and this music is beautiful. It's the thing that's in common of those, but I'm not sure that's right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of this, like, I'm not sure that the thing that causes us to say, the painting is beautiful is actually the same thing that causes us to say that the, equation is beautiful. I don't know. What do you think?
So wait. So let me understand this first. So beautiful to you, when you say beautiful, it's not this one idea that is beauty, and you find beauty, let's say, in an equation. So what you're saying is the beauty in the equation is not the same as beauty in the painting.
Like, I'm not saying that it's definitely not, but like, I think there's a tendency to say, well, we all know what beauty is because of this kind of like abstraction away from the individual instances of it. But what I'm wondering is like, to me, like, the act of abstracting is always like a little bit dangerous, because like, can you really, you know what I mean? Like one way of looking at this, and maybe it feels natural to us, is that we notice these similarities in our experience and regularities, which I think is totally normal. And any kind of, communication, everything requires this level of abstracting away from the individual into these sort of categories.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, assuming that means that there's something sort of solid at the center of that concept
Hmm.
not be true, right? It kind of comes to the late Wittgenstein stuff about what if words are more like, family resemblances, because he finds all these problems where, in the philosophical investigations, where, the harder you look at a word, the harder the harder it is to see how this one word, like game or whatever, can apply to all these different cases.
Yeah. No, what you're saying, how the way I relate to it is basically what you're asking is there like a final truth that we can all grasp, right? Is there like something like is there a final definition of beauty that we will be able to get at some point,
Yes.
or does it not exist entirely, and we are just pattern matching monkeys? Love to notice regularities and then give it names.
Yes.
So
And then it's
basically,
like,
instead of the truth being at the center, we come at the center.
yes. But at the same time, like, I think because we kind of have this almost like binary thinking, we think, well, either there's some objective truth, or else it's all just like purely relativistic. And, either we agree that the concept of beauty is solid and we know exactly what's in it and what's not in it, or else just everything is completely subjective, and we everything is relativistic, and it's just a mess. You can just say whatever you want. And my view is that neither of those is true, actually. So like you were saying, that there, it kind of has to be humans sort of at the center of it, but it's it doesn't mean that you can that therefore it's just all made up, if that makes sense. Like there,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'm not fully convinced of your position, I would say, because I go in more like, but maybe I'm not really given this much so much thought to it. Like, yeah, my now that you say it, I realize that my position might have been reactionary. That I just thought, okay, truth doesn't exist, everything is relativistic, we are all at the center, so everybody exists in their own virtual reality. They just make up things, and for some weird reason, like, I cannot confirm that you are real, right? Maybe I'm making this all up. Right? So, but then you're saying it's somewhere in between. uh,
Mm.
how does it work then, like?
Well, I think I end up in like this kind of pragmatist position, which is like the truth is actually like ends up being what works. So it kind of brings it back to this empiricism, which is like, certain things are functional to achieve some kind of end. And the kind of American pragmatists in the 19th century, Dewey, James, and I guess Dewey's a little bit later, but William James and Charles Sanders Peirce, like their view is that well they each had a different kind of understanding of truth, and they disagreed with each other, of course. So but like for James, I think it's something like truth is what works. He's the one that comes closest to saying something like that, which
Oh,
Peirce really doesn't like. But for James, he's like, people seem to immediately jump to this relativist position, which is like, well, anything works, and therefore there
yeah,
is no truth. And he's saying, no, actually, what works is a quite strong constraint on what you're saying. Like almost nothing works, as in, like, I'm trying to think of like what would be a good example, but there's all kinds of things that I could say about the position of objects in this room. Let's say there's the table is next to the desk or whatever, and it's like that. Okay, that works, but you
yes,
can't say like there's a
it's,
lot of things you can't say, like there
yeah,
is no table or there's 10 tables or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
possible configuration. So it
yes.
works. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's like, and that would just be like a really concrete example, but like for him, it would also be true of abstractions as well. So I think he would say, you know, just that rather than saying there is some kind of absolute objective truth that we can, that I would say that that's kind of like maybe the naive view is kind of maybe too judgmental, but like probably I went through a lot of my life, let's just put it that way, assuming that yeah, there's one objective true answer to a lot of questions, that science does this thing that kind of gradually reveals what that one truth is. And, at the end of the day, everyone's going to kind of align through this process on what is true.
Mhm.
And I think it's fair to say, like, that has kind of fallen apart, maybe not just for me in recent years. And
Yeah.
so then if that's not what ends up being the truth, then what is the nature of truth? And I don't think you can go over to the other side and just say, well, it's just a human construction and therefore it's just whatever you feel like saying. Like I actually think that both those positions are wrong. But I don't actually know if I can articulate a middle position very well at the
But no,
moment.
no, I think you quite did though. Like, the idea that truth is what works, it's starting to make us like a lot of sense to me now. Like, it is kind of in the middle position, right? Like, you're saying basically that, first of all, it does exist. So you're denying. First of all, you're saying, okay, we are not completely relativistic, right?
Yeah.
Because, okay, if this is a virtual reality, I could imagine my.
Oops. I think I lost you, unfortunately. I'm not sure if you have lost me or vice versa. We're facing some technical difficulties. I'm going to take this time to just hang on a sec. Sorry, I had something buzzing behind me. And we have lost Anam, so I'm going to try and see if I can get him back on. But if we can't, I will... then I may just have to wind down and say goodbye. I think I'm going to start doing that. So thank you for watching. It has been a very enjoyable conversation. We'll probably do more of these. I'm going to see what I can display on here. I am Brian Cam. You can probably hear me typing away. And I'm going to post my Twitter. Can I share that on this? Yeah, there's my Twitter. We got Anam again? There we go. Hello. You are potentially on silent again, but at least I can see you. Can you hear me and everything? No, I can't hear you actually. But is that my fault? Have I got you muted? No. It's the same thing. You're still muted. So... Nope, still muted. And you've cut out. Oh, there you go. Now I can hear you. I'll read it. Yeah.
It's just nothing. I didn't change anything.
Yeah.
Connection, I guess.
Oh, right. So just Wi-Fi cut out or something.
Yeah.
It was right in the middle of an exciting response. So you were saying in virtual reality, just about whether truth works.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, if it's all relativistic, then I could just imagine myself flying.
Yes.
But can I do that? I cannot do that. So it's not you know, that's not truth. It's not completely virtual reality. So it is somewhere in between though. But I can like interpret things. So let's say that's something to me. I can interpret it as much like as I want it. It can make me happy. Like some event can make me happy and can make me sad, right? So there is some relativity to it.
Yes.
But now I'm trying to think, okay, does this truth is whatever works? Like how does it fit into that kind of thing where you can interpret and we cannot, right?
Yeah, and I sort of think that like my current position is like that a lot of reasoning comes from those kind of indexical things. So, you know, when we're describing where how do I get to this place? And you're like, it's over there. Or if you say it's over there and it's over there, then that's true, right? That's like reliable. If you say it's over there, then that's not true, right? And so there's that kind of level of what I think of as indexical truth, like something you can point to. And those things are, you know, work pretty well. Then there's this other element, which is like social truths, which are basically, you know, they are essentially what people say, you know, or what a consensus of a group is. Like, let's say, I've given the example before, like if you're with your family, let's say, and you're like, oh, you remember the time this thing happened and no one else remembers it, you're going to start to be like, did that actually happen? You know what I mean? Like if everyone disagrees with you. And there are these kind of social truths where it's like someone, you know, there is a kind of potential weight of, you know, of consensus that would go against you. And you would just say, I must be wrong about that. And so those kind of truths may be more like, I don't know. So it's like almost like one is based on things you can point at and one is based on like social consensus.
Yeah.
And we end up using one or the other of these to layer up these abstract truths, but sometimes they're not actually suitable for those kind of questions. Do you know what I mean? Like, going back to physics, like, is light a wave or is it a particle? Well, kind of depends what you're doing, maybe. Like, maybe kind of both, or maybe in reality, maybe reality is not like either of those things that are ultimately metaphors, right? Like, so in certain contexts, this way of thinking works, whereas in certain contexts, this way of thinking works. But on some level, truth doesn't enter into it, as in it's sort of true if it works for the purpose that you're applying that to, rather than being true in the kind of sense that the table is right here and you can point to it, or um, you know certain other historical truths that we might say. There's a lot of things that we just end up agreeing on, right? Like the consensus is the Earth is this old. Is that like definitely that right? It's like, well, everyone who's looked into it has come away, with this kind of consensus, and we end up just saying that's what we trust. And it's not quite the kind of thing that you can point at, but it's also, I don't know, or
Yeah.
maybe it is. I don't know. What do you think?
I have some very interesting thoughts on this that just popped up. So going back to like how you're describing, you can categorize it into two. Something like say indexical, you can index point at. The
Yeah.
other is where you have to achieve consensus. So let me try to rephrase it in a way that like the way I'm seeing it. So indexing things, let's say it's more physical, like it's in the physical world, it's outside,
Mm,
right? The other one, consensus building, like what event happened. It's more like mental, how you received it. But then I don't like the idea of dividing the world into mental and physical, because not
right.
in the end it's not really
Yeah,
defined.
that kind of dualism that, yeah.
Yeah, this I don't like that. So now based on that I came up with this, like it came to my mind that no, you don't have to do it this way. So what's the problem is of communication.
Mm,
If truth can be described with very few dimensions,
right.
so a thing, three dimensions, like location, height, that's it,
Yeah.
right? So it's very easy to communicate, so it is there.
Mm,
Another
mm,
person
mm,
can confirm. The problem with social truths is that it's like very high dimensional,
right. Mm, mm,
cannot be condensed, and thus you have some loss of information when you have a communication,
yes.
right? And this drop, this noise leads us to say that okay, it's a different interpretation, but I think it's just too many data points to effectively communicate.
Yeah.
Like if somebody could like record an event, every single thing, like the temperature, what happened, and stuff, and then just like wrote everything down, then it would become truth, right? But then
Yes.
anything like a newspaper describing an event, like you're using less dimensions.
This is fascinating because, yeah, if it's, you know, I don't necessarily think of, everything quote unquote physical as simple or whatever, but it is something that Einstein says in Relativity and the Problem of Space, this thing that he wrote in the early 50s. He's um, like scientific thought, what it is that you're only allowed to use space-like metaphors. And so, like, that would kind of align, because if what we think is space or space time, right? It's like space is 3 dimensions and space time is 4 dimensions. Then, in a certain sense, like what you're talking about is low dimensional, right? And so it's almost like if it can be described in those terms, it is. I don't know. Does that line up with what
Yeah,
you're?
yeah, exactly. Like you're so essentially, it's all a communication problem. Then truth is a communication problem, right? If you some truths, for example, the temperature is rising.
Yes.
Everybody can confirm it. Why? It's not because it's physical, like it's not mental or physical. It's because it's low amount of data and it's
Right.
easy to like process. Is global warming true? It's very hard to convince people because there are so many multidimensional data points. It's just
Yes.
hard to like give the whole argument while talking.
Yes. Well, and because history itself is hard, right? Like it's like, even what has happened in a simple case, we kind of said, yeah, what if you remember something that no one else remembers? kind of, but there's also, like, what if everyone remembers exactly, the situation, but their interpretation of it is different, right? Like everyone says, oh yeah, this person did this at this time, but some people think, oh, that was justified and it made sense, and other people are like, no, it was totally inappropriate or something like that. You know what I mean? Like there's so that but I mean, this issue of the traces of the past is also a big kind of philosophical question, which is like, what is left over? Like, what is the basis of the evidence? There are these huge periods like the early Cretaceous. There's like one fossil or something like that. But we have all this kind of data that we extrapolate from what we know of the periods before and after. You know what I mean? But it's like in terms of stuff we can point to, there's almost nothing. It's like it's this really limited
Mm-hmm.
data. I don't know.
How do you mean? How do you mean? Like how stuff you can point to, and how past is like different? Do you see what I'm?
I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure I've got it really thought through, but just like, the further away we get from a certain event, the
Mm-hmm.
more it seems to depend on like consensus about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, did Alexander get to India? Well, in a certain sense, we can't know. We can know what a lot
Yeah.
of different people said, and then what they wrote down, and that's about it, right? Like it kind of, it's not going to leave a trace in the way that, um, even really serious events like a war or something like that. You could imagine an enormous war that happens in 5000 BC. Would we know anything about that? Like, probably not, right? You know what I mean? Like, we could only make the roughest guesses about what happened, And so then the further back you get, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it's important to examine the evidence and come to conclusions about it. It's more just like thinking about how much of our own thinking depends on the consensus of others, right? Like anything I say about physics, anything I say about geology, anything I understand about biology, almost none of it is because of any experiment that I've done where I could have seen anything at all, right? It comes in through reading or through conversations and through a form of consensus, right?
That is true. That is true. And consensus. Let's okay. Now, okay, I'm trying to frame this again in the communication problem,
Yeah.
right? So the past, so the farther away you go, the more noise you add to the channel, and the
Yes.
more lost it gets. And
Mm,
what is consensus? Consensus is basically, so we record the data, whatever happened in our heads,
yes.
and then we all sync. That is the data, like is the data, or what is it matching, is it not? If like it's too crazy, then people have divides. If it's like, okay, let's say 90% matching, then yeah, okay, we have consensus. But then what is consensus? It's a way of basically like how blockchain validates things,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Right, it's data, so we're just, so it's
You can
historical.
imagine problems with this process just as you can with blockchain, right? What
Yeah, yeah,
what
exactly.
if you think that this is the right, consensus, but there's
And
another one that's bigger or whatever, that it's like doesn't matter what you think anymore, right? So
so it's a problem that, how did you record the event? So like what you're saying about the fossils. So maybe you just have one data point, and
yeah.
then you can extrapolate, interpolate any way. You can make dinosaurs have feathers and not have feathers, right? And you can do it either way. But the more data points you have, the better the consensus, the more records. So basically, you're not low dimensioning. You see what I mean? Like you're not
Mm, mm.
putting it into low dimension. It's still like keeping it faithful to the original dimension. And the time problem is that the more farther away you get from time, definitely you'll lose more information along the way. So it keeps getting more and more low dimensional.
Mm, mm,
And it
mm.
becomes hard to have any record. Then you rely on consensus, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, and I'm not sure that I certainly have not cracked this problem. I think I'm just speaking aloud about ways that I've thought about it,
Hmm.
because, and I don't want to end up in this position, I'm quite reluctant to go and say, well, because there's not consensus, then therefore all knowledge is kind of pointless. And I'm I'm not a relativist either, but there are, I suppose I've been quite influenced by Thomas Kuhn and people like that, where they look, the harder they look at,
Thomas Kuhn is the scientific revolution guy.
yeah, scientific revolutions. Yeah, did you read that or?
Yeah, I found it a bit boring. So I stopped. I was expecting, because when everybody else describes the book, they're like, okay,
Yeah.
science is bullshit. Like this guy, everybody hated him and stuff. So I was expecting something like more, but it was a very. Maybe I'll get to it at some point. Yeah. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, go on, go on. Sorry for
Yeah,
interrupting.
I did a very long Twitter thread on it a few years, which is still on my on my profile or whatever. But he, you know, like there's some very fascinating things at the start of it, which is like he's like the the more you look at history, the harder it gets to answer certain questions. Like, when was oxygen discovered? It's like it's an apparently simple question. As soon as you start to dig into it, it gets harder and harder and harder to answer. And it seems like it may have no answer, which is like this crazy position, because he's like, well, it's almost like one guy kind of discovers the physical stuff around it, but even that guy doesn't really understand the implications of what he's discovered. And then it takes these kind of successive stages before the sort of framework shifts enough that you can say, this is what we think it is, so it's kind of like, I don't know, that kind of perspective. I think that has been what I've found, which is, like, it's almost like the popular narratives about they're easy to understand, right? But they're usually like, they usually fall apart under scrutiny, is what I would say. And so I don't know what to do with that, like, because what I don't want to do is basically pick all the holes in a dominant narrative and then leave you with just a mess, because I don't think that's like a good. People do that, Nietzsche kind of does this, right? It's just like, let's just pick it apart and then show that
It's
it
on.
exists. And then you're, well, thanks. That's like, now you've just left me with a big mess. And I suppose I suppose my kind of point of view is that, and it aligns with Graeber and some other people, which is like, if we come to the consensus, like if a lot more of it is consensus than we thought previously,
Mhm.
and a lot of like social constructs and ways of arranging life, let's say, even without going into like the hard sciences or whatever, are these kind of emergent things from human culture, then why, like, if a lot of it resides in this area of imagination, then shouldn't we be trying to imagine things that we like more or something like that, like going in a direction that people are happier with, rather than kind of saying, well, we can't imagine anything else, so we just have to keep doing what we're doing, or something like that.
But religion is basically imagining yourself being happier, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You imagine you're a god who can, sort of, randomness goes away from your life and everything starts to make sense. It makes you happy. It makes you less stressful. So people we are trying to do that. Like people are trying to do that, right? So
Yes.
that guy is right in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's kind of like this model of what would life be like if, these things were true, and behaving as if they're true, and
Yeah,
it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling process somehow, right?
yeah, exactly. But then it's a hard problem. Like the thing is, okay, okay, at too many. Okay, the way I'll simplify it is that. So somebody, I think I read a tweet which summarizes this. So our brains are not truth-seeking machines. We are
Right,
not machines. We are survival machines,
right.
right? Whatever works, as long as it works, as long as it keeps us alive, and that's it. So, but by taking the, let's say, the approach that you're taking, let's say the historian, let's say the scientific approach, where you try to uncover truths and stuff, then you are basically going against, you're saying, okay, I'll use my brain as a truth seeking
Mm, mm, mm.
right, which is not what it is meant to be. So
Yes,
then you have all these problems, and maybe the problem is because we're not meant to be that way.
right.
Just imagine ourselves, we just want to imagine ourselves being happy. We don't want to we don't want to think through all this hard logic stuff, man.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know, but Yeah, this has been great. Is there anything you want to sort of say in closing, or anywhere we can point people to if they watched, if they got to this this far in the video?
Well, I don't know. I think all the books we discussed, but then
Mm,
those are very popular books, right? So
mm,
people
mm.
should be easily able to find them
Can
online.
you put your Twitter or something in the chat? Is that like a thing you can do?
Yes, I can do that. I do not yet know how to type on the okay private chat. It says, oh, I can type a message right here, but it's a private chat.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So you got private chat. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I've
Uh,
got chat overlay. Why don't you send it to me and I'll.
yeah, I'll send it to you. Well, I have a website, but then it's like there's not much on it. Just most of my work related stuff, not my. But I at some point I'm gonna put something there.
Cool.
Mostly
Yeah.
my research papers and stuff.
Let's put the okay. So that's my Twitter.
Great.
Let's see. Can we show yours? Ah, cool. There's your website, and I also have a website which I will send and show.
Right.
Yeah, there we go. This has been great, though. I really enjoyed this, and let's do it again soon, shall we?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, man. I'm gonna end this stream.